Right, I'm gonna get started because I think we want to keep moving through the afternoon. Hopefully, I have a few slides up in a minute to keep us going through this session. So, yeah, I'm John Ireland. I'm here from the University of Oxford. Could have walked to the conference this year. It's superb to have it so local. I would just like to ask the other folk who are here from Oxford just to stand up so you can see how pleased we are that it's this close. There you go. Give them a wave. Hello, team. Thank you very much. Okay, sit down again. So I talked at last year's conference to tell you about the service desk consolidation project that we're embarking on at that stage. And I've been invited, really pleased to be invited back this year to talk about how that went. We have finished the project. We are embedding things into the way that we're working. And so hopefully I'll be able to share a little bit of insight into what we've achieved, how it's working out, and give you some guidance that might be useful if you're undertaking similar work. So to recap from last year, we have been through a merger of 3 reasonably sizable IT departments. These were all in central IT in Oxford, so we had 3 separate central IT departments. It's totaled around 350 members of staff, and at the point that we started we had 5 different main help desks, so 5 different phone numbers for users to remember, 5 different email addresses, 3 or 4 or 5 different tool sets. There were certainly 3 different pieces of software and multiple versions of all sorts, so the information wasn't all in one place. We had bits and pieces of processes. We had a bit of incident in one place, a bit of change in another place, but nothing particularly comprehensive, nothing joined up across the department. And our users weren't sure who to call. And when they did, Team A would try and pass it to Team B. Stuff would get lost. Nobody knew quite where the information had gone. So, as one of the commitments for our central IT merger, one of the things that our Chief Information Officer, newly appointed at the time, promised to do for the university was to provide a consolidated support function that was easy for users to access, delivered a responsive and consistent support experience, and was a coherent part of our overall new IT services department. Now, the project itself, there's a beautiful timeline for the project itself. I've actually got it here on my phone. I was flicking through some photos that we'd taken originally. The very first project planning session for this project, we sketched it all out on a whiteboard, and it was a 6-month project. Quick in, quick out, easy to do, and didn't involve too many staff. It was fairly straightforward. In reality, and looking back, probably April the 1st wasn't the best day to have started the project, back in 2013. It's actually taken us 2 years. It took 4 times as long as we originally expected. It's cost a lot more than we originally expected, and it's involved a heck of a lot more staff than we originally expected. So everybody who just stood up from Oxford has been involved or impacted by this project in some way to varying degrees. And I think, there was a bit of mention of KPIs earlier on in the conference, I think there should be a new project KPI, which is the number of sleepless nights experienced by people in the team. This project was certainly one of those. So here we are, the timeline. So fairly standard. I don't think there'll be anything that's a huge surprise. Thank you for the slides. We started off with some planning. We had to go and ask for some funding, get an outline of what we were doing. And we kicked off actually with process design, figuring out incident, change, service request and problem management processes. In many ways, the very first time we'd done this, certainly as a whole department, we got some experience of doing it in much smaller scale operations and only doing a few processes at a time. That bit worked really nicely through the first summer. We had lots of people involved looking at the processes. We moved into tool selection. We had vendors competing with scenario-based demonstrations and all sorts. Heat came along. I mean, the vendors put in many, many days of effort preparing for our scenarios. We even paid a consultant to go and explain our scenarios in more detail to make sure we were going to get a really good view of what their tool sets could offer us. And then round about the end, sort of December 2013, early January, we moved into the solution design, looking seriously at how to configure the processes into the tool sets, look at the reference data we needed, and spent quite a long time then implementing it. And then just towards this end bit, somebody said we probably ought to go live at some stage, and you can see these 2 little boxes at the end. I'll come back to those, training and transition. So that was the outline. You can see there's a few purple milestone-y type points going along there. So April the 1st, project approval, kick off, get going. Just about a year later, we replanned the project. And one of the things that we learned there is that when you're going through your ITT, when you're working with your vendors, you're looking at the products and so on, actually you probably haven't got all the information you need to draw an accurate plan for the project. And it wasn't until we sat down with HEAT's consultants to look at the tool set, bring all the people together who'd actually be using it, and bring all their requirements together, that we found that these people's requirements were only that big, these people's requirements were only that big, those people's requirements were only that big, but to meet them all was huge. And at that one, we had a 2-day workshop with HEAT, looking at what was required, and it roughly tripled the amount of work that we had ahead of us at that point. So it's unfortunate that we'd already submitted our PID and had our funding and timescales agreed for the remainder of the project, because it means we knew from that stage that it was going to be a real struggle to manage it. We had a second replan a bit later on when we realised we needed to draw some new experience into the project team, somebody who'd actually done something of this scale before, and a fresh pair of eyes, because it had been going on for quite a while. And everything moved fairly smoothly and to track from there. Yeah, please. Thank you, Chris. So that was our timeline. How did we do? Looking back against the original aims, actually we ticked the objectives. We went live. Actually, it was, as I said, later than we expected. It was on the 20th of April this year. We've got incident request, problem and change management processes in place. Staff have been trained. Staff have been trained and trained again. We had classroom and online training. 350 people were offered that. They were required to do training before they got access to the tool. We've done the awareness sessions. We've done the ITSM simulations. We've done the sort of walking around talking about it. We've done the group sessions and the workshops so that people know what's going on with that. And it's in place. The HEAT toolset is configured. It's integrated with our single sign-on, with our user directories and so on. And it's working. It's in use. It's the exclusive system now that's used for all of our support operations across the department. We've taken over 30,000 incidents since we went live on the 20th of April, so just under 3 months. We've got 37 of our services configured in there. There's some more detailed breakdowns into sub-services and components, because our original service catalogue, which I'll come back to, had around 150 services listed in it. And we've got 105 teams identified. So if you've got a call, you need to know where to escalate it to. There are 105 different places to escalate, and those are different combinations of people in there. So we've achieved that. We have consolidated our service desk. And another key part of our project, bearing in mind that Oxford is a very, very devolved IT organisation, was that we wanted to build a solution of processes and tool set that would work and be extensible out to the other parts of the university, the other IT teams out in our departments, faculties and colleges. And some of the discussions with some of the early interested teams have started already, so we're looking at doing work over the summer to figure the process out for bringing them on board with their service catalogues, their teams, their user data and so on. And the thing that really brought it home to me that we had succeeded on this was last Monday before, we had our IT services staff day, so all of Central IT invited along. Our CIO stood up to reflect on the successes of the year past, and at the very top of her slide was the statement that we have now consolidated the service desk. We have delivered that promise to the university to make it easier for users to get hold of support and to make that support experience much, much smoother. So if we did it again, we have learnt a few things along the way. We work in IT, so obviously, as soon as we started talking about tool sets, everybody went, brilliant, tool sets, we get excited about that kind of thing, it's technology. And there were an awful lot of people fiddling around with the SSO integrations, the user directory stuff, trying to work out how we'd configure workflows in the tool set. It all worked through web browsers, which was great, so anybody could start having a poke around. And we had to keep trying to remind people to come back to the fact that this is really about process. It's really about trying to make us all work in the same way. And the tool set's there just to support us. It just needs to be there in the background and get on with things. Unfortunately, we were completely wrong about that. It was actually all about business change. And two little boxes we had at the end of the timeline talking about training and about transition, you know, those needed to run right the way through the whole project. We had engagements. We got lots of people involved in the process design, lots of people involved in the toolset selection, but we sort of let it all drift after that. We weren't making the rate of progress we'd expected, and so we weren't talking to users, weren't talking to the rest of the staff in the department about how exciting it was, what they could see, giving them early sight of the toolset and so on. In reality, we needed to go back to that. We did pull one little trick at the end, which I can thoroughly recommend. How many people here had the desserts last night? Yeah. Yeah, okay. Yeah, quite a few. You may have seen a little picture on Twitter that Tony put up earlier of me chomping into a whole range of waffles and ice creams and things. And you know, we're all programmed to like sugar. And when you see these nice sweet things, your body does this sort of physical response where it kind of brightens up and it gets excited about things. So on the day of the launch, I personally delivered over 200 cupcakes that we had made round to staff in the department. You might call it floor walking. I did get to visit everybody in 2 of our larger buildings. There were some other staff that weren't quite coming on board at that stage. But we delivered cakes. It was amazing, despite the fact we sent 4 or 5 emails to every single person in the department, more like 15 to 20 emails to most people in the department. There were people where when I turned up with these cakes, they said, oh, is that happening today? So cake is the way to people's hearts and minds and to get your organisational changes going through. We should have done cake all the way through, actually. Coke and crisps, it works. I mentioned earlier about the tool selection piece and needing that workshop with HEAT to really look in detail at what we were doing. The ITT and the contract negotiations, yeah, it was all important, it was all the right stuff, but actually it wasn't the thing that moved us forwards. The thing that moved us forwards was actually when we got to sit and talk with people who knew the tool set, find out how our requirements sat. We got heavily tripped up with a few assumptions and things that came in there. One of them was the assumption that having a service catalogue in SharePoint and published on our website meant that we had a service catalogue, i.e. a list of services that we needed to program in to register calls against and so on. It turned out that list of services wasn't right. It had an awful lot of things in there that were products, pieces of software, things that teams do, stuff that we felt was quite important, so it probably ought to be on a list that's published somewhere. And it was useless for actually putting into the tool for people to log calls against. Our first-line staff wouldn't have been able to log things against it. And it took us 6 to 9 months to figure out what that list was, because it's a very cultural thing. When we said to a team, that important job you do is still an important job, it's not a service, we're crossing it off the list, they got very, very touchy and concerned about how their work would be represented. We also had some assumptions from the other side, and we assumed that everybody worked the same way, and that everybody understood what we were trying to do. So when we ran an ITSM simulation, many of you will have come across the sort of Polestar, Apollo 13, Formula 1 type simulations. We ran a number of these for staff so they could get to see what it was like to work in a process-oriented environment. And when the feedback forms came through, people divided into 2 very, very strong camps. One group of people who went in saying, brilliant, I now understand what it's like to work in a process-oriented environment. I went in expecting to learn this, I've come out knowing it, fantastic. And we had another group of people who came out saying, that wasn't what I expected at all. I thought I was going to be shown how to use the HEAT toolset. We went back to look at the emails that we'd sent out. A few chuckles going around to some people here. We went back to look at the emails that went out to notify people about these training sessions, and when people read through the email, they said, oh yes, it's very clear, isn't it? There were a lot of assumptions that people had made about what we were doing, and despite the fact that we thought we were communicating well enough, the message just wasn't going over. Thankfully, in that situation, we'd used some feedback to catch it, and were able to help the next groups of people coming through, but that's crucial. Another thing we did right at the end, round about those last 2 stages, was actually asking HEATsoftware to come in and help us. And they've been really helpful throughout in terms of telling us how the implementation would go, managing implementation at their end and so on. But when it came down to the configuration that ultimately we wanted to end up doing, and being able to support ourselves in the longer term, we've kind of kept it all quite tight. Coming up towards the go live, we got some defects coming through from UAT, and we engaged Chris Launton from HEATsoftware to come in and actually spend a few days with us, and it was amazing. I can't remember how many defects it was. It was a long list of defects, and he just sat down and was like, tap, 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 that's one done, tap, 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 that's another one done. We really wish we'd engaged Chris a lot earlier in the project, because we'd have had something useful that was working that we could have shown to people, started that engagement, started to get some of the feedback and so on coming in from that side. My last point is around the customer perspective. You know, universities are incredibly complicated places, and our customers act in so many different roles for each of them. One of our other assumptions was that the way that you deal with an incident is the same for any type of person around the university. We also assumed that everybody was dealing with incidents. In fact, it turned out they were dealing with all kinds of things that they were just bunging through the old tool sets. So spending 6 months to develop a new training course counted as an incident in some cases. That really didn't translate very well when a message goes out saying, oh, your thing has been resolved. So, what have the changes been? What's the impact? What have we seen since the 20th of April? Well, we've had the debate about customers, I think, already. We have internal debates in the department. Are they customers? They're not really handing over cash at the point they get something. We don't like calling them users anymore, because I guess that makes us all dealers. So maybe they're consumers. Actually, but I like the term customers. And in fact, on BBC Radio Oxfordshire, just a couple of weeks ago, they did a little montage in the morning talking about the fact that this year sees the first home and EU students coming out of university having paid the £9,000 of fees for 3 years, £27,000 worth of debt from having taken a course that previously would have cost you £9,000. So they are customers, they are paying for stuff. They see the university as the university. Yes, there's this person in IT that they phone up, but it's still the university that's providing them with services in exchange for all this money. So we're in there. I think as Heidi was saying yesterday, you know, it doesn't matter whether it's the finance team or the student administration team or the residence team that have got issues. We're all there together. We're all the university, and we're all seen in this together. So every little bit of improvement to the experience that we could deliver is helpful in that sense. So one of the things that came through, these are things that have been fed through to me. Self-service, people being able to click through and see a list of all the calls they've raised, status of it. They can't actually see who's working on it at the moment, but they can see sort of little green bars and so on exactly where it's got to. We got some really good feedback early on from people saying that they raised lots of calls over a typical year, and they used to struggle because they got the impression that things were being forgotten about and lost. And now they can see. It might be taking us a while, but it hasn't been forgotten. We've gone for the two-part closure, so we send a message out saying we think we've resolved the call, and then if nothing else happens, it closes automatically after a couple of weeks. And there was a great discussion with Oxford's ITSS community, so 350 of us in central IT, 300 people out in the units, colleges, departments and so on, about whether sending out your call has been resolved message out is wise or not. Because it tends to trigger users to come back and say, no, it isn't. Interestingly, some people think that's a bad thing. I think if your users come back and say you haven't actually resolved it, that's actually rather a good thing, because it gives you an opportunity to sort it out. And in fact, we're not getting too much of that. But it certainly means that we're being much clearer about what's happening with things, and our users seem to appreciate that. It wasn't entirely plain sailing, and there were some early days bumps. I mean, we were talking about moving 350 staff from some very entrenched ways of working in some cases and no consistent ways of working in others, through to a consistent set of processes, working off a single tool set, in some cases finding out things that they'd never seen before. And so it took a while for the teams to adjust, and there were one or two things that we hadn't picked up during our testing that came through. One of the most significant ones for us was when users responded to some of those resolved calls in the first case, it didn't actually flag up to us that there had been another response, and we spent a few days having to go and manually dig through to find out where that had come in. We've now got faster and more effective escalations, and I'll talk a bit more about that on the next slide. But escalations for customers are now working. They can speak to one person who has access to things and can sort it. We have put in a single phone number behind things. Those 5 service desks that we had originally, they're still specialist teams for the key areas, and where certain members of the university know they need to access one of those teams, they still can. But we do now have a single phone number. We have migrated the first-line support for our desktop, which was a big area, into the main service desk. So where users previously had to think, is this a desktop problem or an email problem? Well, it's an email on the desktop. I'm not sure whose phone. They can now go to one place and it works. And we'll actually be advertising that phone number as the sort of primary point of contact more during the summer, once we're happy we've had a chance to really get used to the new processes. Customer complaints, 0. Now, I'm not saying customer complaints across the whole university, 0, great, we solved the whole problem. They're still complaining about the IT services that we're offering. Email still has issues, the network still has issues. But in terms of complaints about the tool set and the support for service that we've got in with it, it's been really well received. There's us too. Doing battle with the serpents and dragons that herein lie, sorting out people's IT woes. 350 of us in central IT picking this up. So one of the things is, this is the first time we've actually invested properly in our service desk in a decade or more. And actually taking the time, putting the money in, raising it up at a senior management level, getting support from senior management who really did buy into this. Initially, I think they thought it sounded like a good idea, and then latterly, when we started showing them how their teams were engaging and giving them progress charts, this many of your staff have done the training, this many of your staff have accessed the system, they really got it, they believed it was going to happen, and the morale in there really started to grow. Now, we have also we've cheated a bit, we've put some more staff into our service desk. We did realise it was well under-resourced, and we've managed to find some additional resourcing to put extra staff in there. It's crucial for the transition that we had some extra staff in there. The fact that our support staff are now there at the front, they've got a proper tool set, they've got processes that go across the department, they're not just the bit that gets remembered at the end after an exciting innovation project or something. They are a key part in the heart of the organisation. We've got clarity around responsibilities. I guess this sort of thing happens automatically when you put ITSM type processes in place, and if you go and read your ITIL books, it talks a lot about roles and responsibilities. But you know, we never really had that understood before. Everybody had kind of developed things in their own way. IT in Oxford had evolved from a very sort of technical perspective, putting computers on desks, putting servers in data centres, and support was a bit of an add-on to that. But now that we've gone back and taken stock and looked at it properly, we've identified that, well, probably the person who speaks to the customer on the phone is responsible for some specific elements here, taking ownership, finding out what's wrong, understanding the language, empathising and realising what the scenario is for that academic or that student. But then when they pass things on to the technical teams, and the way we do that in HEAT is we record the high-level incident, which captures the details of it, but we then issue tasks out to the technical teams and ask them to go and investigate this, or change that, or reconfigure this item. And you know, we got a heck of a lot of tasks rejected. Our infrastructure teams didn't like this idea of getting tasks issued. We were having to chase around and say, well, why did you reject this particular task? Oh, well, they said that's not our job. Brilliant. You did it last week. That's not our job. So we asked them what their job was. And it was interesting because in some cases we never knew what their job was, and we were asking them to do things for decades that they couldn't do. No wonder tickets got stuck. So we learnt a lot around that part of it. The other thing we got was we've rejected the task because you didn't put the right information in there. We went back and said, what information do you want? And we realised that, again, these things that had evolved over time, stuff that had been agreed a long time back had changed, and we weren't feeding through the information that people really needed to be effective in second, third line, and so forth. We've got visibility of all services. I mean, this is part of the merger. This is the consolidation thing in its core. Every member of staff can now see every service that we deliver. We used to have 3 separate websites with bits of service catalogue on them. Nobody really knew what the totality looks like. And you can. There's a drop-down list that's got all our 37 main services in. There's another drop-down list that shows you how they're subdivided. And that means that people can actually have a sense of working alongside each other. We know what all the different teams do. There's 105 different ways of dividing the department up into teams. We know what everybody's doing. We know which services they support. And we can manage escalations much, much better. So I mentioned the escalations earlier on the customer slide. This is where I get involved on a day-to-day basis. I'm not directly working in our service desk, although sometimes I really wish I was, because it does seem to be delivering a lot of really great support out to our customers. But I do get involved when there are escalations. And for the first few years in my role, this was a real pain, because somebody would come through and say, I'm very irate now, I'm head of department. A member of my staff has been critically waiting on this thing and it hasn't happened. Here is a ticket number. And I'd look at the ticket number and say, right, it's between 10,000 and 30,000, so that means it's on that system with that team over there. So I can't see that one, so I'll have to phone somebody up to find out what the information is in that ticket, because I don't even know who raised it. Or alternatively, if the ticket number was more than 2 million, I knew it was in another system where I could go and see it, and I'd read all the way through the history, and after reading it all through, I'd get to this bit at the bottom where it said, have phoned another team and asked them to help, but that's the end of the trail, because it's now gone to another system. It was a nightmare in the past. But we do now have it all right there. I can go into Front Range Heat, our Heat ITSM solution. I can key in the incident number or the change number, call up all the details, see exactly what's going on. And you know, out of 4 calls that I've received, 2 of them I was able to say to the person, it's already been resolved. We tried to phone you to leave a message with the new access code you need so you could pick the voicemail up. We also tried to email you and it bounced. Ah, yes, that member of staff has changed their email address. So it's been brilliant from my perspective in dealing with that area, which was really hard before. Complaints. We've had a lot of complaints from our own staff about this. The very people who we should have had involved in the project from the outset, right the way through, looking at it, commenting on it, and helping us to make it a success. We've had about 130 issues raised by our internal staff. The good news is 80 of those were related to notifications, so the kind of emails that come out when status changes and various things happen, new tickets get set up and so on. Those have actually been dealt with through a combination of some of the changes that HEAT have made to the software, and also the fact that quite a lot of people, because we didn't engage early enough, didn't know what the consequences of their decisions were. So they said, yes, we'll have all notifications, or yes, we'll just have a few notifications. And then when we went live on the 20th of April, they received that all notifications was a lot of email. Just a few notifications didn't suit some teams. So we've managed to deal with a lot of that. The vast majority of the remainder are largely around enhancements, feature requests and that sort of thing. This is all from my perspective, of course, so do feel free to chat to some of the rest of the team who are here and get their perspective on it as well. I'm sure they have some slightly different angles on this. But yes, we have had quite a few complaints or issues to deal with from our own staff. The final point on that slide is that SAS works. We made a decision early on in this project to go down a SAS route. Oxford University has been using more and more kind of cloud-based solutions. We've got lots of legal things to try and sort out internally to make sure we're properly happy with it. But we recognised early on that our infrastructure teams were so busy with everything else that was going on, a new student system, changes to the all these sorts of things, they weren't really going to have time to help us get through this. And actually, that was one of the things that held us up later on in terms of the integrations with single sign-on and so forth. But HEATsoftware, as a SaaS solution, has worked really well. We've got 3 environments. We've got a testing environment, a staging environment, and a live environment. They're accessible from anywhere in the world. It's the same experience at home as it is in the office. We're not too worried about having a power outage in the offices because we can pick it up from elsewhere. And the thing that really made that come true was that we had 2 system upgrades following our go-live. So 2 upgrades since the 20th of April, and nobody noticed apart from the new things popped up. I asked a senior management team who realised last Monday we had a major system upgrade overnight. No one at all. This SaaS stuff really is working well for us, and it's made things incredibly smooth. But I think we realise now project is complete. It's embedding. There are still a few bits to tighten up and sort out, largely around people accepting the processes, realising that case management isn't part of incident request or whatever, and we need to find other ways to support some of the work that we used to do in the old tools. But we realise that the project's been a major turning point. We've raised the profile of the service desk and of service management. We've shown how to do some of these things professionally in the organisation, and we've put in place a platform that we can build on, that we can keep improving on. We've invested properly in the service teams, and we've made a step change in our overall capabilities, and we're starting to think about the future. We're starting to think about expanding the number of service requests we've got coded in there, bringing out user portals with all the requests captured in them. We're thinking about extending our reporting so it's not just the standard reports that people need, but the reports that challenge people to be able to improve. We're looking back at going and reviewing what we did around incident prioritisation, which in some cases is a number to tell the technical teams how high to jump, and in other cases tells us how badly it affected the business. We've got to review that. We're just starting work on coming back to that service catalogue that we've got in SharePoint and publish out to our users. The fact that it didn't work for our tool set suggests that we need to look at that again. And then we've got the sort of the out-of-hours support, the remote support and configuration management, live chat, all those little things heading off up the top. But we've now got a really great platform to work on that with. We're really pleased with it. It has taken 30,000 calls and nobody's died, so that must be pretty good. So thank you very much. I hope there's been a few insights in there that will help other people looking at this sort of thing. You can see the Heat team at the back, and we're here. We're happy to take some questions.
Can you hear me? Yep. Just to follow up on the software as a service. So what's the response when people worry about losing access to the service and then your service desk grinds to a halt if your internet connection is down or whatever?
Yeah, so this was an area of concern. What happens if the university loses its Janet connection? Well, actually one option is mobile phones, tablets with 3G, go home. You can access it from anywhere that's got an internet connection, and the response is just as good off those devices. There's actually an app for tablets that we're looking at using in some of our teams. It's brilliant. So the question then is, well, how stable is our own infrastructure? Is it going to be as stable as or more stable than the infrastructure that's being used to host these SaaS platforms? And it's not my place to comment on that. But we do have outages. We've all had outages. I think we're in a good place with it. Whatever solution you go for, you need to think very carefully about what do we do about our support function if we lose some critical capability here, whether it's an internal tool or an external tool. You need to be able to deal with that, because when you look at your DR planning, of course, quite often issues are coupled. So maybe the reason that you've got a fault that people are trying to phone your service desk about is associated with the infrastructure that your service desk runs on. Now, in this case, we separated it out. So in some ways, we're probably more resilient than we would be having it on site. Make him run.
I'd just be interested to know how you managed to get the the colleges and faculties to buy into this? Because obviously our university is similarly structured to yours, and they're sufficiently ruggedly independent that it's hard to see why they would want to cede control of their help desks to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So that aim in the project was to build a solution of process and tool set that could be adopted by other parts of the university, IT and non-IT, but it wasn't a mission to take over and push it out there. So we've built a solution where we've got an idea, we've made sure that there are various structures, flexibilities in it that will allow that to work. On our project board we had a head of IT from one of the departments and a head of IT from one of the colleges. In fact, we've got one of those people here with us today. And they helped to guide the project through to make sure we were keeping those things in our minds as we worked through it. And we're due to be starting work this summer on the process for onboarding another department. So in terms of the buy-in, and you're right, I mean, in Oxford, the colleges in particular are fiercely independent. We've got about 140 other IT teams around the university, and almost every single one of those has got its own ticketing system for 3 members of IT staff and between 500 and 1,000 users. So there's a lot of diversity out there. Some of them have actually got those for very good reason. In some cases, their own local help desk systems are embedded with their desktop management solutions or their configuration management systems and things like that. And for them, there wouldn't be much reason to move at all at this stage. Maybe when they get to a toolset re-implementation, they might look at that. But for other teams where maintaining their local system has been a real pain, or where they want to be able to work more closely with central IT, so enabling, for example, the local team to act in a first-line capacity, but then when they want to escalate to a second-line team, they can escalate directly internally to us without having to bump it through yet another first-line team. The tool set and the process and the setup we've got in that allows us to offer that. And so the benefits sit there. As I say, we're speaking with about 4 units at the moment, including some larger ones like our libraries and some of our divisional IT, and also some smaller ones in a college and one of the departments around the move to that. What we do find, of course, is that the Central University talks about big numbers when it comes to money. We've got lots of people, lots of customers, lots of staff, lots of systems, and so we're used to banding around numbers that have got zeros on the end. In some of those smaller units, the IT budgets are minute, and the thought of spending £100 or a couple of £100 a year on a license to access something is just completely out of this world for them. So there will be differences. Different units will think about this in different ways. It won't be suitable for everybody, but for those where it might work, we're ready to have those discussions and look at bringing them on board. We think it will create a much more joined-up support organisation and support experience for the users at Oxford, where this devolution can sometimes get in the way of efficiency. Okay, there's our instruction. We'll wrap up now, but I, the Oxford team, and the HEATsoftware team will all be around in the exhibition area, so do ask us any other questions over coffee. Thank you.